that's not necessarily going to be subject to CSIS, or it would be subject to CSIS, but just the aspect of it that came through the regional process.
Yeah, just so
Okay.
just the scope
Yeah.
that applies to that non-shop component. So if it's like a pavement rehabilitation, right, that's kind of overlapping with it, we're not going to look at the pavement piece. We're going to look at what is the scope, whether it's, adding a managed lane, whether it's, adding, some element that falls outside of the shop program. We're really looking at that scope and scoring that particular piece.
Got it. Okay, thank you. Okay, and then for Mara, this is kind of piggybacking on this sort of transparency conversation we had, because in one of your points, or in one of your slides, you mentioned that you all are trying to meet all of the federal and state requirements. You're sort of, it's not just the climate goals, but it's also all of these other goals. And so I guess this links back to your immediate prior slide about outreach and engagement. Sort of how, in your experience, do MPOs in that RTP process really kind of daylight sort of as you get to the end of that process and you're really making the assessments and elevating the particular goals that each project meets? How do you talk to communities about that and help them understand sort of how you're weighing the different goals that you're all trying to meet?
Sorry. So we look at that throughout the process, as I've talked about, and we engage with the communities as we first establish our goals and then our evaluation criteria and performance measures. But I think in terms of where it makes the most sense, in a sense, to our communities is when we develop the scenarios that match up the different a different suite of projects with different land use scenarios. So we build a scenario and we build multiple ones, and then we test them and run them through our model and against the different evaluation criteria and performance measures. But then we also take those scenarios out to the communities. So we hold public workshops, we present them at city councils. They, of course, go to all our technical advisory committees and to our board multiple times. And so those scenarios show different sets of projects with different land use assumptions and how they actually perform in terms of those goals that we want to meet. Climate goals, safety goals, our housing, whatever, all our goals and how they meet those different ones. And so we typically start out with a larger number of scenarios with different mixes of land use and projects, because it's often surprising what performs better or not. It's kind of not always as intuitive as what you would think. And then we bring those out to the public and get input on what makes sense from their perspective of how we have put these together. And then we revise those scenarios, go back out again. And ultimately we come up with probably 2 major scenarios that have different uses. And then those go back out to the community, to the tax, and to the board, who ultimately selects, based on public comment and other input, the scenario we use to develop the actual RTP-SCS. So it's a very iterative process. And I think realistically, and as somebody who's not a planner by trade themselves, the scenarios are really where I think it makes it real, because you can look at what we're talking about, what level of density and what types of communities, and what does density mean in our largest city of Salinas versus our smallest communities in the Salinas Valley. And how do those suite of projects address the different goals that we have set for us as a region, and how well they do that. And then how the communities feel about those different sets and those assumptions that we're making.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. We're going to go next to Commission Vice Chair Grisby, followed by Commissioner Cruz, followed by Board Member Rexroth.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to both the presenters. I really appreciate the information you shared. My question is for Marlon, and it revolves around the land use and natural resource metric. You said one of the constraints of CSIS currently is for urbanized projects, the metric does not distinguish between new HRV/managed lanes versus conversion projects. Given that a lot of the conversation about highway expansion right now tends to be around managed lanes, additions versus conversions, can you talk a little bit about why that section is silent and what types of enhancements may occur for that section in the future?
So, I might have to get back to you on that question. So, my apologies, but, certainly, context comes into play, as we're looking at, different alternatives, or as projects are looking at different alternatives. And, um, I'll need to get a response back to you on that one, just because I'll need to consult my team on how best to respond.
All right, appreciate
Yeah.
that. And before I turn over the mic, I just want to associate myself with the comments made by NextGen and NRDC around some of the operational issues around CSIS and how to make it public and above board and everyone can see it. So appreciate your time and your effort around all this work. Thank you.
Vice Chair, thank you. Commissioner Cruz?
Thank you, Chair Gardino, and I appreciate the presentations from Marlon and Maura as well. I think my question speaks more to some of the efforts on the self-help side. And I applaud these efforts to generate, new financial mechanisms to fund transportation projects. But I'm concerned a little bit about just alignment, especially alignment for projects who are part of an SCS on the local level that have been voter approved, non-shop, that don't necessarily align with CSIS entirely. Will they be ineligible to compete for state funding or federal funding?
The short answer is, the short answer is no. What we're trying to do with our scoring, and there's two layers to it. The first layer is as call for projects come out from these different funding programs. We want to make sure the projects that we're evaluating and how they align with the program goals of those funding programs. We want to make sure first that we're finding the most competitive projects. And based off of our methodology on the alignment of the funding programs, we give like a high, medium, low sort of rating on that. So we might have a project that rates high in terms of its alignment with the program, which we have some degree of confidence that it's going to be able to compete. The second lens is the capped eye piece. So, there may be some circumstances where maybe a project is maybe in the middle of the pack. It's sort of in that middle band in terms of capped eye alignment. So it's really sort of dependent on the mix of projects that we get. If we get other projects that are high alignment with the program and maybe high alignment with capped eye, obviously those are going to be the ones where we're going to take a closer look at. But it's not to say that we're going to discount projects that might be high alignment but middle, if that makes sense. So, and there are other lenses that we have as well. We might have a project that maybe is high alignment in the funding piece and high alignment on capped eye. But as we're working with the project teams, maybe they can't deliver that project by the timetables that are associated with that program. So that's a project that we're obviously not going to be able to move forward with because it's not ready to go. So I think there's a number of data points that we're trying to piece together to make good decisions as to what we're going to submit. But just because of the scoring on CAPDI, I don't want to say that it's going to discount a project from being able to compete. Just by the mere fact that we're looking at all the projects and doing the scoring. A lot of the information that we need to get, to do the scoring, we're working closely with the partners to get that information. I can tell you just briefly, one example that I have that where we've seen low scores is we're working with the sponsors and maybe there's information that they didn't provide us. We know that it's there, but we want to make sure that we have the information to be able to do the scoring. Because if we can't get the data, that's an example of us not being able to really have a complete score. So there's a lot of facets to this. I can tell you one of the lessons learned that we're coming out of our pilot is better communicating what's needed up front. So there's transparency in terms of the information that we need to be able to do the scoring. But just by the mere fact of us looking at all the different projects, nothing is ineligible. I think everything's on the table.
Appreciate the response. Thank you.
Thanks, Commissioner Cruz. We're going to go to Board Member Rekshak and then Board Member Guerra. And then unless I see other tent cards in the room, we'll go online to Board Member Pacheco Warner. Cliff?
Thank you. Marlon, I have two questions, follow-ups from prior questions. The first is a follow-up from Chair Randolph. If there's a project that in part or completely falls out of the CSIS process, is there any other leverage you have for taking another look at the projects and trying to bring them in closer alignment with our current climate and state goals?
So the short answer is we absolutely want to do that. As we're thinking through projects, active projects that are ongoing, we certainly are finding opportunities for projects that might be scoring lower to circle back to say, these are some of the things that you can actually look at in terms of, improving the project. And so we very much view it as an ongoing process as they're developing it. And that's just, sort of built into the process. So when there's a future funding cycle where they may resubmit that project, hopefully when we reevaluate those projects, we'll see some increases in those scores.
Thank you.
Did that answer your question? I'm
Yes,
sorry.
it
Okay.
does. Thank you. And I'm very glad that you're continuing to look at whatever opportunity for leverage that you have. The second relates to scoring and the relative scoring. You answered a question from Board Member Shaheen, and just before you were talking about this. On the CSIS metric, between a project that scores, if let's say you have 5 projects that score high on reducing VMT and only one that scores high on the land use natural resource element, but it scores the same quantitative number, are you doing any qualitative weighing to say, well, we're gonna diversify our projects so that we're selecting one that promotes land use and natural resource preservation, or how are you evaluating those two parts of the score?
Yeah, that's a good question. So assuming we have projects that are in high alignment on as far as the funding programs and they're roughly the same in terms of the CSIS scoring, we have a number of different lenses that we might look at. One of that is making sure we're maybe looking at geographic equity. So if we have a lot of projects that are clustered in one area, we may look to see what other opportunities are there to look at other parts of the state to hopefully see to make sure that we're having some of that equity across the board. And those conversations might come up, right, as far as, some of the things that you're describing. But I would say that there's probably not a super hard and fast rule in terms of that. But we do want to make sure that we're prioritizing, again, the competitiveness of the projects, and then also uplifting that the CAPDI alignment as well. Those are our two priorities.
Cliff, anything else? Great, thank you. Board Member Guerra, and then we'll go online with Member Pacheco Warner.
Thank you, Chair Gordino. First, thank you so much for a great presentation on CSIS and an explanation of the analysis. And I want to also thank Commissioner Tiffany for his comments on rural communities and the need for investment in those roadways. And I was just commenting to my colleague here, Mr. Eisenhut, about growing up on the intersection of County Road 86 and County Road 23 in Yolo County. And when it would flood, there would be very little access anywhere out of the areas, and Highway 16 tended to be one of the few options. And so it was always challenging, from my understanding, to get sometimes funding for rural communities, both at the local level and even from the state level. So I appreciate that, because in some of these rural communities, access still becomes a challenge. The question that I have, and then I do have I would say a comment or more of a request, but the question on that aspect is there the analysis also to fund rural communities on the very needed infrastructure that they may have on particular safety? Where is the consideration of a project that's very much needed, but could be sprawl inducing? And it's interconnected towards my next concern here, but is there an analysis that you're taking into effect where there's a project that very much needs to happen because of the number of accidents or the number of flow traffic, but this could have the unintended consequences of additional sprawl?
Yeah, I would say, we will be working with our districts to maybe understand that aspect of it. I know through our local development review process, we work with a number of local entities, providing comments on projects that might just do exactly what you're stating. But as far as our CSIS process goes, we are looking at that BMT piece in particular, and the model that we run that through. I think it does account for that land use component, and to be able to sort of model through what that increase in VMT would be. But what I'll do is I'll circle back with my team and make sure I can confirm that the answer that I'm providing you is accurate.
No, I appreciate that. And then this comment is maybe for our body and for our staff's team here. But obviously we should take into consideration every opportunity to make CSIS as effective as possible, to make us be more wise in the choices we make for the future. But I worry, and I made this comment the last time we met as a group, that the changes that we need are so significant to address our public health goals, our climate goals, our housing and transportation goals, that essentially this is almost tinkering around the edges. And I don't want to minimize the significance of this, because I think this is a very forward-moving and important step that the state has taken. But given all of the billions of dollars that are pulled together and put together by our state, and in the need to make sure that we're executing not only our aspirational but our statutory responsibilities that we've already put in place, I almost feel that it's important for us to rethink and use this avenue to look at ways to hit those multiple goals better. Because some of these projects, particularly transportation projects or others, have been designed to singularly tackle one particular issue. That's partly of the legislative process. Bills come into place tackling one issue, but it gets tacked onto an existing program and necessarily isn't transformative. So what we're doing is kind of tinkering around the edges, much like the buildup of some of these programs. So I'd like us to, maybe this is Mr. Chair and Chair Randolph here, a request here, if our staff could start looking through the programs that have looked at the purpose goals. I'll use REAP 2.0, for example, that looks at transportation, housing, infrastructure, and climate change. Yet it was one of those that are in peril during this budget cycle, but that are hitting those multiple goals. And, and if we look at even other programs, even from SGC or others, they are each in their own siloed place. So maybe a request to the body here is to have our staff come back together to present the actual programs and that are hitting these multiple goals versus what is happening now, which is, I think, sometimes tinkering on the edges of, which needs to happen, but of the existing framework that we're living in. So one, I'd ask for that maybe as a task to bring back for us. And lastly, at least if we identify pots of buckets that need to be changed or looked at, I think the CTC has the statutory requirement of annually recommending to the legislature legislation. So, some of this is a product of the legislature, and so it may need to go back. So maybe that is an outcome of this body. Of next step is what can be forwarded to the legislature out of its annual statutory report back. So I'll leave it at that. It's more of a comment and a request. And then thank you for answering the question on the potential for the much needed improvements, particularly on speed and accident issues in rural communities, but the issue of sprawl inducing projects.
Thank you, Board Member Guerrero, for the suggestions and the feedback. We are going, I'm not seeing any other tent cards that are vertical on the dais, so we will be going online to Board Member Pacheco Warner.
Thank you so much. I think this is really exciting because I definitely, like others, don't see this in isolation, but really thinking about proactively, not only at the state level, but how locals can also be more proactive. Now that they have had time to think about VMTs through a number of mechanisms, and we've all learned about what didn't work. So I'm very optimistic by the intentions of the metrics, and my hope is that, new voter approved mechanisms in the or those in the pipeline to be approved or proposed are being put forward with the transparency about, VMTs and the desire for the state to, for everyone to come into alignment with these projects, so that they're not cut out. I think, I really do share Board Member Guerra's concerns and also agreement on the rural front about, the idea about getting more opportunities to have projects funded that otherwise would not be funded with local resources, but do share his concern about sprawl. I wonder, and this is maybe if you can comment if you've thought about it, or if there's opportunities about how the metrics can also align with AFFH. I know we had a little bit of comment and part of the presentation this morning on freight focused on affirmatively furthering fair housing. So I'm wondering if there's a little bit on that, those metrics that could be tacked on to address the issue of ensuring that the projects don't motivate new communities for the most wealthy versus actual, rural projects that need to be funded. So yeah, I have that question, and then I just have one comment that I'll just say now, that I really hope on the alignment of agencies, I want to see if there's an opportunity on the staff side for there to be an alignment on data required across agencies on VMTs as much as possible. I've heard from MPOs and others that, getting consultants to do this data, particularly smaller agencies, that can be a burden, especially if we're requiring, different analysis on the same types of questions. So I've heard frustration on that point, and I'm just wondering if there's an opportunity also for alignment on across agencies on the VMT questions. Thank you.
Marlon?
Sure, thank you, Chair. In terms of your question, certainly we can look at that. And in regards to the VMT, I think there is, some agreement that with rural areas in particular, the set of VMT tools that we have at hand, are lacking. And so we actually are working with the Rural County Task Force to look at better tools that are suitable for rural areas. And so that is one thing that I'll mention. And the other thing that I'll mention as far as the VMT analysis goes is, because there might be some confusion with this, but as we're scoring the projects, we're not doing a VMT analysis per se. What we're doing is basically pulling the information out of the environmental document. So we are relying on the project sponsors to provide the VMT data. We're not running a separate analysis. And so we want to make sure that we're being internally consistent, as we're doing that. But certainly I think there's this consensus that, there is, room for improvement in terms of the VMT tools. And I think that's an opportunity for the various agencies to collaborate.
Thank you, Marlon. I do not see any other tent cards vertical or anyone else online from either the board or the commission. With that, we're going to move on to item 5, which is our Executive Director, Tanisha Taylor, with any wrap up and next steps.
Thank you. I always appreciate the lively discussions that we have at these meetings, and I thank you all for participating. I want to thank the public, our interagency staff, HCD, CARB board members, our commissioners, everyone who's really here, really informing this process so that we get the best policy outcomes from the work that we're doing here together. We had a fruitful dialogue and discussed topics of statewide significance, including fair housing, sustainable freight, and community impacts, and how transportation project prioritization is conducted to ensure we achieve state goals. I've noted the following action items from the meeting for our staff to carry forward. The Fair Housing Team will be available for consultation on the continued implementation of SB 671. We will continue coordination with the Caltrans CSIS team to enhance consideration of land use in the CSIS through the identification of resources that would aid coordinated land use and transportation planning for projects on the state highway system. We're going to continue to provide updates on the implementation in the work we highlighted during the Sustainable Freight and Community Impacts panel this morning. And lastly, we're going to continue to present on the programs and how we're coordinating across our agencies to align our goals that meet all of our agencies. We talked about our local transportation climate adaptation program and incorporating fair housing. To Board Member Guerra's point, how can we meet more goals with each of our dollars that we have? And we'll continue to do those things and continue to report on those things in our progress report on interagency coordination. Thank you.
Director Taylor, thank you. Do we have any public comment on Director Taylor's comments? No, that comes later, but you are well positioned if you want to make yourself comfortable. Any public comment online to Director Taylor's?
Not seeing any requests from our online attendees.
Great, thank you. Then let me start, now we're going to public comment. Mr. Hirsch, I encourage you to stay nearby, but you're getting your steps in this way. Sir, you have up to 3 minutes.
Thank you very much. I just want to reiterate that there was an attempt at a public hearing around the I-80 toll facility. And as far as I can tell, only one member, non-lobbyist group, a member showed up for that. This is a toll facility that's going to affect the residents of Davis. and Woodland and the community, and only one showed up because it was held at rush hour in West Sacramento, not where the commuters live. We'll use the causeway. And like I said, we had a teach-in on I-80 and 180 people signed up. We've had hearings on a city of Davis policy on it. We've had 30, 40 public comments show up. So I said, there's no lack of interest on I-80. There's a lack of public involvement. So I encourage the staff to hold another meeting if they really want input on the toll authority in Davis at a time that's convenient to the residents. And I would remind the community people that Davis is upper income. 60% of the Davis residents are students, and they live in neighborhoods they are economically disadvantaged in terms of the category. So I would the public process is so important for us to trust in government. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Mr. Hirsch. Is there any other public comment for items that we haven't covered that are in the room or online? Not seeing anyone in the room, so online, please.
I do see one hand raised from our virtual attendees. I'd like to call on William Walker.
Hi, and unfortunately, I'm moving, so I hope you can all hear me. I'm William Walker. I'm the EAC chair for the CTC, Caltrans, and CalSTA Interagency Equity Advisory Committee. I'm calling in to express like a desire for there to be more than just coordination. If you want to be involved in these discussions, you have to read a scoping plan from CARB. You have to read the California Transportation Plan. You have to read the RTP SCSs from 18 different regions to understand what all of the requirements are to be an engaged citizen, to be able to be a part of this process. I made a recommendation to Caltrans staff at our EAC meeting that at the district level, that they hold town hall meetings once or twice a year and incorporate EAC members as well as stakeholders from the community and stakeholders that are from different advocacy backgrounds. So I'm hoping that CARB can also look at the same thing and possibly do it in conjunction with the CTC. And I don't know how HCD interacts with the public, but there's been a lot of news around how the housing grant program, how the money went so fast last year, and so this year there was more of a equitable process. It would be really great to figure that out. Just being someone who grew up riding public transit and living in affordable housing, we really have the tools to make California work for more than just the folks who can afford to live here, but also the folks who can't. And I'm just hoping that you all have the power to say that you all want to come together. And this joint meeting is one piece, but I'm hoping that there'll be more pieces. I invite you all to come to our Equity Advisory Committee meetings. Our schedule's on the CTC website. I believe our next meeting is in Orange, California, and it's also virtually accessible May 15th. And it will be in conjunction with our commission. So we invite you, and we'd love to know who your equity stakeholders are as well. Thank you for your time.
Mr. Walker, thank you. Is there any other online public comment on items we haven't covered today?
I'm not seeing any other request to comment at this time.
Great, then we'll close out the public comment, if I may. I want to thank you all who tuned in to our joint meeting today, either here in person or online. We had, I think, at a highlight, more than 150 people online, as well as people here in the room. We always cover so much ground in these conversations, and I'd like to thank the teams from our 3 agencies who help coordinate these meetings. In particular, on our commission team, our commission administration team, specifically Doug Remedios, Brandy Fleming, and Justin Hall. Your help in making today's meeting run smoothly is deeply appreciated. I look forward to continuing these discussions at our next joint meeting, which will be held November 7th in Riverside, California. Before we conclude, I also want to invite you all to the commission's next town hall meeting, which is 2 days in Fort Bragg. We truly try to get out to the 482 cities and towns and 58 counties so that we're accessible to the broader communities here in California. And that's next week, April 17th and 18th. Our town hall meetings are a terrific opportunity to learn more about rural transportation issues. Second, again, my wife and I put on charity community runs throughout Silicon Valley, and those shirts are from a run that we do called Stars and Strides around the Independence Day weekend. These are last year's shirts that we've been saving just for you. This particular race is to benefit our public hospitals and public healthcare facilities and the 1 million overwhelmingly underserved people that they serve annually. So don't just take one, take a bunch, enjoy. These are all women's cut over there. But with that, I'd like to ask Chair Randolph and Director Velasquez if they'd like to make any final comments as well.
Thank you all for participating in this discussion. It was a really great meeting today. I really appreciate all of the board members and commissioners, both in person and online, whose questions and thoughtful engagement really makes these meetings so important. And the HCD participation is incredibly informative because we spend so much time in the climate and transportation world that sometimes we are not keeping up with the critical housing issues that we are confronting here in the state of California. So having Director Velasquez here and really having, Megan and others that allow us to really dig deep into the intersectionality of these challenges, it's just a great opportunity to understand what's happening and how we can be doing better in the state of California. So thank you all for the participation, and we will see you in Riverside in November.
Thank you, Chair Randolph. Director Velasquez.
Thank you. It was a great meeting. Thank you very much. I know it wasn't too housing heavy, but it's still a great meeting. I started the meeting with my remarks around synchronizing our effort, right? So I appreciate Mr. Guerra talk about, can we hear in future meetings about, programs that are working where we are actually, in fact, synchronizing our efforts. We know what the problems are. We've talked extensively about the problems that we're trying to close around climate change, a cleaner air, more transportation options, clean transportation, and of course, to close the gap on the tremendous housing shortage that we have, especially deeply affordable housing. And we just need to, go back to what has worked, where our three entities have worked together and have come up with good solutions. And, we can just keep replicating those successes. So it's a great suggestion, and I look forward to keep talking about that.
Thank you, Director Velasquez. And to our two executive directors, Tanisha Taylor, Stephen, any closing comments either of you would like to make? Okay. With that, we owe you 9 minutes of your lives. We went slightly over. We appreciated it. We didn't want to limit a robust conversation. Appreciate everyone participating. Thank you. We stand adjourned.